You got life.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mrs. Lofton, all set.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to just wait a moment while I see the number of attendees going up. Okay, I'm still seeing the number of attendees rising, so I'll give it just another minute. Okay, it looks like we've leveled off. So I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Before we dive into the agenda, I do want to announce that we had a meeting, an executive session to discuss personnel prior to this meeting. And with that, we'll move into section 1.02, which is the roll call, and I will turn it over to Mrs. Widener.
Thank you. Mr. Dorr?
Here.
Mrs. Evans-Brockett?
Here.
Dr. Hallis?
Here.
Dr. Kohler?
Dr. Kohler let me know she will be late to the meeting this evening.
Okay. Mrs. Lofton?
Here.
Mrs. Mayers?
Here.
Mrs. Roberts?
Here.
Dr. Weston?
Here.
Ms. White?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Widener. We'll move on to section 1.03. Please join me in rising for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That brings us on to the reading of the PVSD mission statement, section 1.04. The mission of the Perkiomen Valley School District is to cultivate an inclusive community of learners empowered to grow intellectually, socially, and emotionally. 1.05, approval of the agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved, Gene.
Second, wait.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I do want to note that there is an item on here. Item 5.21 was removed from the agenda this afternoon because we do not yet have the contract in place for that. But that's, I believe, the only change that we made this afternoon. Is that correct, Dr. Russell?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions about the agenda? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. That brings us on to 1.06, the approval of the minutes. May I please have a motion to approve the minutes of June 8th, 2020 and June 29, 2020 and July 6th and 8th, 2020.
So moved, Gene. Second, Matt.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any questions about the minutes? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. The agenda is approved. The special presentation on planning for greater equity and inclusion was provided last week. And that brings us to comments on any topic. I do want to, before we go into the comments, I do want to call out that we are adjusting our public comment procedures, as you'll see on the screen listed here in the agenda. We are working to use the raise your hand feature that is available in the Zoom. It's a Zoom feature. And when we get to these sections, we will allow participants to raise their hands. I do want to call out though that I've gotten some feedback regarding why questions that are posed during the public comment period are not necessarily answered during the course of the meeting. And I wanted to call out that the purpose of the public comment period is so that the public has an opportunity to provide their comments, and it's not intended to be a question and answer session. When we do have a meeting with, a handful of participants, we may try to address comments that are raised during the meeting, but it is not typical that is how the public comment section will operate. So since we do have some comments that had been submitted to our email address prior to the change of the procedures, we're going to go ahead and go through those comments now. After that point, written comments can be sent to the email address that you'll see on your screen there. It's virtualboardmeeting@pvsd.org. And then we will be using the raise your hand feature for public comment during the meeting. Comments during the meeting will be limited to 3 minutes. And if we determine that we need to truncate the public comment section due to the length of the meeting, that is something that we may do so that we can proceed to taking care of the business that is on our agenda. Mr. Supers is the district solicitor, and he's on the meeting as well to ensure that we are following all appropriate processes and procedures. And Mr. Supers, can you just comment on what the requirements are around the public comments? What our requirements are under the sunshine laws for comments?
Where the only requirement is that you provide a reasonable opportunity to the public to comment on matters of concern, official action, or deliberation before taking action on any item. In regard to how public comment has been treated over the course of the COVID emergency, there was some informal guidance issued by the Office of Open Records, which is responsible for the state agency responsible for the administration of the Sunshine Law. And they basically said that the legal requirements could be met by soliciting emails, by allowing phone-ins, or the equivalent, which would be the Google feature that you discussed during the meeting. We're allowing live instant messaging, which is something that various districts have used. So and you're correct that the requirement is to provide the opportunity for public comment. It's not a requirement that the district engage in discussion or a question and answer session with the public. So the procedures that you've described are satisfactory under the Sunshine Law.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Supers. So I am going to go ahead and go through the comments that we had received before we had updated the procedures. The first one is from Paula Erickson from Skippack. I think the comments about teaching children social distancing is ridiculous. These are children, and unfortunately, they learn from the consequences, and the children with special needs will not be able to meet that level of learning consistently. Todd Shine from Lower Frederick writes, without approving the field hockey preseason location, the girls on the team have nowhere to practice. They are the only fall team to not have a location. This is a Title IX issue. Where is the board recommending the girls to practice? Seems a bit unfair to give every fall team an adequate preseason practice location except field hockey. The girls need a properly lined field for field hockey to practice. The proving grounds prove an excellent space to space out the girls. The other fields discussed do not allow for adequate spacing. 1, it's only $5,200. 2, you get a credit if it's unused. 3, in the event you can't use the credit, donate the time to a youth group so they get the time. Jared Gale from Lower Frederick Township writes, the public is being restricted from being able to publicly address our duly elected officials. Not one of you bothered to mention the rights and abilities for the public to address the board is our right. As such, there will be a lawsuit shortly to force the board to hold a meeting where the public has rights and we will exercise them. Every comment from the board was about themselves and only themselves. Are we shocked or surprised by this? Absolutely not. This is who they are, and they need to be put into the sunlight for disinfect. The board is more dangerous than the virus. If you're worried about a public meeting, it can be held outdoors where everyone can distance and the meeting can be held so that all the public is allowed to attend. We are the reason you are there, so we are required to be able to address our officials in person. Be aware that if you hold the meeting and keep the public outside, we will picket outside the meeting and make sure we are heard. Megan Swank from Swanksville writes, "Thank you for allowing parents the opportunity to listen in on this evening's meeting and an outlet to voice their concerns. We as a community recognize that this is not an easy decision, and thank you for working so hard considering the health and safety of our children when making these tough calls. I would like to call out a few health and safety issues that I'm concerned about. I will start with I am pro going back to school, following the traditional approach with the 100% virtual option. I support this because it makes school available to those parents who feel that daily interaction and consistency will most benefit their children academically and emotionally. It also supports those parents and staff who are not yet comfortable returning to school and who have the capacity to dedicate the necessary time and resources to their child's at-home education. My husband and I have a 10-year-old daughter with an IEP in Schwenksville Elementary and a 1-year-old daughter who strongly believes she is invited to all conference calls. We, the parents, have been just surviving since March 12th. There is no option for childcare or camp for the majority of this time. Few of us are able to give 100% to anything. My performance at my job suffered tremendously, which added the stress of what repercussions that may cause further down the line. From March till June, every day I was a mother, an employee, a daycare worker, a teacher/teacher's aide, and a guidance counselor. Being a spouse and an individual barely made the cut. All that said, I feel blessed and consider us one of the fortunate families. My husband and I can work from home. We work well as a team and recognize when the other one needs support. We isolated with our daughter's grandparents to have help with childcare. Once in the yellow-green phase, we had the financial means to hire a nanny for our baby. I'm finally able to be productive at work and not have the added stress of underperforming over my head. We are now in a place where we have reprieve. Things have balanced out a little, which brings me to my real point, the families that are unfortunate and the increased volatility in our community. Okay, I'm going to truncate this comment because comments are typically limited to 3 minutes. And we've gone past that now, but the full comment is available in the attachment there for everyone who wants to read this. I'm going to proceed to the next comment from Christine Leifer in Lower Frederick. Says, I'm a Lower Frederick Township parent of an outgoing 8th grade student from West. The closure of schools created a world of unknowns, especially for those of us with special needs students. Hold on just a minute. I experienced sheer terror trying to anticipate how I would be able to help my son, a kid who requires several in-school accommodations and hands-on support daily, all while both my husband and myself continue to work outside the home. Through a rigid daily structure and weekly contact with teachers via Hangout, my son went from B-C+ to straight A's. I know many struggled with the isolation, but my kids simply thrived. They blossomed when the weight of social interaction was removed from their shoulders. They no longer had to put on a brave face when getting teased or prodded to the brink of frustration. There are countless students who found out they don't hate learning or they're so much smarter than they thought they were. Well, while my son desperately wants to get back to school to see friends, he has recognized that he liked school so much better online. First and foremost should be the safety of our students. I'm fully expecting a hybrid model for the 2021 school year will be the best way to proceed to give our kids the contact they crave, but protect them as well. I would like my son to be able to watch a live feed of his classes, possibly recorded for later viewing, since homeschool hours may not sync with the classic school day. The sooner we accept the likelihood, the more preparation time we all have, parents and students and faculty. Thank you for your time. Okay, start. Michelle Klatch Johnson from Skippack and the high school writes, in the July 8th meeting, Superintendent Barbara Russell indicated the district is most likely going to pursue the hybrid path. After listening to the comments of the other concerned parents, I feel even more strongly that this is not an appropriate way to go. The hybrid method imposes a one-size-fits-all approach on all families, which will likely only fit a few based on the comments read. I understand that this is a difficult decision, but it appears to largely be made without the input of the families it will affect. What little of the survey results that were actually presented seems to contraindicate both the desire and the need for a hybrid approach. I'm basing this conclusion on the slide indicating 73.5% of parents to plan to send their children back to school on site in a traditional format, and that 42% of parents would take advantage of an entirely virtual plan. Kim Mayer surmised that 73.5% of parents are willing to send their children to school, understood that question to mean 5 days a week. When I took the survey, that is how I interpreted the question as well. So based on the survey results, it appears that the majority of parents are willing and prepared to send their children to school full time. I understand that our state is mandating social distancing restrictions that would make it next to impossible to allow 100% of those kids to come back to school full time. However, I also see the solution in those survey results that indicate 42% of parents would take advantage of full-time virtual learning if it were an option. That would basically half the students in the classroom, freeing up space for spreading out desks and fitting students in the hallways and buses, achieving the same goal as the proposed hybrid plan. If there are parents who desire virtual learning and parents that desire in-person learning, why would we impose hybrid learning on everyone rather than just splitting the students based on our students' needs and family preferences? Under the hybrid model, our teachers are going to need to address two learning methods, so there would be no additional burden on our teachers by just splitting the children into two groups. Consistency is important for our children, and this would provide it where a hybrid model would not. The hybrid model is not effective for all students, as virtual learning is not effective for all students. Hybrid learning creates scheduling and daycare issues for working parents. Hybrid learning does not address the social needs of some of our children who are struggling right now. I implore the board to consider the option of allowing our families to register their children for either full-time virtual learning or full-time in-person learning. At the very least, please offer more than one survey to permit parents to vote on this approach versus the hybrid approach prior to your vote. Okay. Oops. All right, so that's 3 minutes. I'm going to move on to the next comment. Tammy Cairns from Schwenksville was a recent PD grad and soon to be high school junior who happens to have serious underlying health conditions. I want to first sincerely thank you and commend you on your efforts on what has been a daunting, enormous responsibility in making the best decisions for our parents, for our students, parents, teachers, and staff. I would like to speak to the virtual learning plan preparation. My daughter, Lily, is a type 1 diabetic with a few autoimmune conditions that make her high risk. Well, our hope would be for her to return to school full-time to get the most out of learning as she prepares for college and to get the necessary socialization with her friends. Our priority as a parent must be keeping her safe, and for that we will choose to have her learning be 100% virtual until there is treatment/vaccine. Lily is a very good student. Her grades were wonderful up until the last quarter this year. Her feedback is the following. If I had a schedule and could be part of a live class while being virtual, I would have done much better. It was too hard trying to track down information and not having an actual person explain things to me. Even listening to other students ask questions would have made me feel like I was part of a group and not feel so isolated. I ended up getting so depressed I could barely find the drive to take it upon myself to check in at my leisure. I felt like I was giving up because it seemed hopeless. I needed structure. I will tell you that not only did her grades suffer, but she also developed a pretty deep depression that we are addressing through counseling. I would plead with you to consider the following that would work for hybrid as well as full virtual approaches. These are the type of changes my company made for those of us who had to become full-time work-from-home employees due to being high risk or having a high-risk member of the household. Live webcams in class focused on the teacher, not in-person students. Teachers will not be able to walk around the class with social distancing, so this should be an easy ask. since they will need to stay in one specific area and stay in focus. Have teachers wear mics so they can be heard clearly. Have designated breakout times during class for online and in-person questions to be asked and answered during class. If this seems too much for one teacher per class to accommodate, hire aides to assist with virtual students and troubleshoot any technical difficulties. I understand every parent has a unique set of circumstances and different priorities. I know we all want our children to have a fulfilling academic and social experience, but we need to be realistic and set all children up for success, regardless of in-person or virtual learning. All classes, whether in person or online, need to be approached with the same way when providing an effective learning environment that works for all students. Okay, I'll move on to the next comment. Okay. Kristen Terzo, who is a parent for 6th and 8th graders at PV Middle School East and Skipback Township parent. Hello, following up from last evening's board meeting. First off, I want to thank each of you for your dedication and perseverance on the return to school plan. It's evident we are in good hands. Writing as I got the impression from discussions that the district is referring to the need to deep clean the school through custodial staff cleaning through traditional means. If this is correct, I wanted to ask if the district/board has considered use of disinfectant systems, which might be more effective and time efficient. Sharing information from a local engineering firm which supplies such systems for use in schools, shown to effectively disinfect large areas in a short amount of time, and the link is provided. They may also offer more flexibility in planning logistics for back-to-school plans and save in additional custodial hours required. Sharing information from a local engineering firm for further information should you be interested. Thank you again for all of your hard work. Angela Dannon from Skipback Township writes, I love the idea of allowing virtual learning as an option for those who would prefer it. My reasoning, I have an autoimmune disease. Both my 10th grader and I had COVID the end of March through June. I still have residual symptoms that I may have for the rest of my life. It was awful. We were lucky that we didn't have to be hospitalized, but it was a miserable 1.5 months. I don't want to risk that again. For us, virtual learning would be the best option since even hybrid would have my kids, 10th and 12th, exposed to others during certain days. Both of my children are happy with the virtual option as well. My question is, will virtual learning be offered for those with immunocompromised situations, regardless of if the majority are doing hybrid or traditional? Okay. The next comment is from William McGill. I'm a 3rd grade teacher at Evergreen Elementary. I live in Perkiomen Township, and I also serve as the Perkiomen Valley Education Association president. Dear Mrs. Lofton and other members of the school board, this letter is intended to be read during the public comment section. Okay. I'm going to skip that part. Okay, first, please know that the PV teachers love their students, love their jobs, and love the community which we serve. We are a highly dedicated group of teachers who, in conjunction with supportive parents, work in a high-performing school district as evidenced by the ratings and rankings we consistently see PV attain. The plan as presented last week with the elementary schools and middle schools returning to a traditional setting and the high school returning to a hybrid schedule will make teachers choose between the jobs they love and their health and health of their loved ones. In order for social distancing to work, we need 100% compliance from 100% of the families, 100% of the time. And you know this will not happen, as was evidenced by the COVID-19 outbreak that occurred with the class of 2020 in June as a result of graduation parties. When families travel to certain states with a high percentage of COVID-19, Pennsylvania is requiring them to quarantine for 14 days. And if staff travel to these same states, they must also quarantine. Staff can be disciplined for not complying with the mandate. What about families who do not comply and send their children to school? A recent article in Minnesota published on July 10th by the Twin Cities Pioneer Press stated that the COVID-19 cases of children ages 6 to 19 have increased by 80% in the past month. The article continued by saying the likely reason for the surge in cases was due to the stay-at-home orders ending, children playing organized sports, and increased socialization among this age group. Social distancing within the classroom is impossible given the 6 feet space recommended by the Montgomery County Health Department. It's impossible to get a full class of students into our classrooms and maintain the 6 feet of social distancing. It is becoming clear that some envision teachers working with students in the classroom like we would under normal circumstances. This will not be the case while working 6 feet apart. Teachers will not be able to work at a table with small groups of students, nor will they be able to help a student one-on-one at a student desk to demonstrate how to work out a math problem or such. There will be no working in small groups or sharing of lab materials in a chemistry or biology lab. If teachers must work with students to maintain 6 feet distancing, we might as well work remotely. In a recent PVEA survey, the majority of teachers do not agree with the district's plan to reopen. Our concern is for the welfare of the students and staff. As of Friday, July 10th, there are 203 COVID-19 cases within our school district boundaries and 7 deaths. This puts the death rate within our district at about 3%. We simply cannot accept this risk because we care deeply about our students, staff, and families. Also, our recent PVEA student found that 25% of staff will be seeking leave of some sort or will seek retirement if we follow through with the proposed models of face-to-face instruction. Okay, I'm going to truncate that comment there. Robert Liggett from Perkiomen Township writes, I just want to state my support of the resolution declaring the state of emergency. It is truly needed to allow for any contingency as we move ahead with educating our children during this crisis, allowing for the flexibility in scheduling to deal with this uncertain future. I also support the health and wellness plan that is being attached. The selection of the blended option allows for us to continue to plan different strategies for different grades with the goal of having as much in-person education as safely possible. Passing the resolution with the attached completed template for health and safety allows the administration to have the time to formulate a plan that works for our district. It is the first step in reopening our schools, a necessary one at that. Excuse me. Stephanie Stewart from Lower Frederick Township writes, thank you for all you're doing to plan for the upcoming school year. I recognize the different difficult decisions you have to make. I have 2 questions about school resuming in the fall. If a hybrid model is selected, will students be able to be learning in a synchronous manner on the days they are not physically present in the school? In addition, will parents have the option of allowing their student to attend in a fully virtual manner if they are not comfortable with their student attending in person? 2, given that the plans being considered do not involve a fully virtual platform for the new school year, if schools are shut down by the state, will PD be prepared to operate in a fully virtual capacity, not in the emergency learning style needed to complete the last school year? Thank you in advance, Stephanie Stewart. Rowan Keenan from Collegeville Borough writes, exponentially more kids died in the 2009 and 2010 flu season. What were your safety procedures then? How long were you shut down? Everyone has to go through this. There is no safe, and young kids get it so lightly, scientists are not even sure that they become contagious. In short, the only harm that we are irreversibly causing is that to our children who are unaffected by this virus, except by what we do to them, by what Governor Wolf has done to them. Governor Wolf has already harmed more people than he could possibly help, and his primary targets are those who cannot defend themselves, the elderly who have their families taken from them only to die scared, confused, and alone, and the young who have their friends and mentors withheld and their development both physically and mentally stunted. Say that you are not afraid, but more importantly, show up to work. We need to live normal. We need to work through the disaster. Remember, all the people who are going to get the virus before the shutdown are still going to get the virus. Thank you for your service. Sue Fetzer from Perkiomen Township writes, I have a question regarding the plan for reopening of schools in the fall. If a family were to choose the online learning option for their child in the beginning of the school year, would they be able to later switch to the hybrid option or full-time option should the current state of the pandemic improve and we see a return to normalcy? Thank you to the board for your time and efforts in ensuring both our children and teachers can move forward in a safe manner. Maria Chase from Skippack Township writes, can you please clarify what this means? Alternative non-singing activities for choral groups and wind instrument groups. Page 13, secondary level. Thank you. Dave Manish from TRAP writes, I know there's a Zoom meeting tomorrow to discuss school openings. However, I wanted to get some comments in before that. I'm sure you are seeing the spike in cases across the country, especially those parts of the country that have not seriously taken the severity of the virus. While luckily children are less impacted, they are not immune and in rare cases develop severe complications, and there have been children deaths too due to coronavirus. Statements made by some at the meeting last week that there have been no sickness/deaths in children are not accurate. Please see the CDC data chart below, and I'll refer everybody again to the attachment to see the chart. Where are we? Also, long-term impact of coronavirus on those who recover from it is not well understood. Schools are also not just for children. The teachers without whom there is no school are also at risk. At last night's meeting, I left with the impression that school is starting, especially elementary, for all students every day. I do think this is extremely risky. I work for a pharmaceutical company, and even we are not going back to the offices until second quarter 2021 after a vaccine is available. Then how can we ask our children to go back into schools at full capacity? I sincerely hope that you and the board take this risk into account and do not start elementary school at full capacity. I very much appreciate that there will be a virtual option for those parents who are too concerned to send their children back to school, and we will definitely be opting for the virtual sessions for our girls should there be a decision to start any of the schools at full capacity. Looking forward to the recommendations tomorrow. Regards, Manish. Okay, Keith Gilchrist from Schwenksville writes, has there been any consideration on surveying parents to see who would prefer to keep their child at home with remote learning? I'd be curious if enough opt out that could perhaps open up an option for the other students to return full time. The virtual students can be taught by full-time dedicated virtual teachers. If we're lucky enough to have families opt out, seems to me that would be best for everyone. Teachers can dedicate their time to being on-site or virtual, which are two different teaching styles. Parents who both work will be able to continue to do so, and you know there are many families in our district that need both incomes. Lower overall on-site attendance will lessen possible exposure. Obviously, if not enough opt out, this option doesn't work. But again, curious if this has been discussed. Also, no offense to art, music, and athletics, but in addition to the above, cutting these classes could open up more availability to spread out the classroom sizes and shorten the school day, lessening possible exposure. Lauren Ross from Skipback writes, regarding the 100% virtual option, I understand that MVA virtual program will be the program PV offers for this option. Is any consideration being made to add more synchronous learning opportunities on a regular basis, because a lot of families may opt for this for the upcoming year? Also, can you also speak to how IEP services are provided through MVA? For example, a child receiving speech and language services, how is this provided through MVA during green phase and possible shutdowns? Is that done in person at the home school, virtually at your home? What about OT? What about daily one-to-one or small group ELA remediation? Will those services be virtual, or will the child have to come into brick and mortar for these services? Chris Singer from Perkiomen Township writes, regardless of what the preferred option ends up being, the school district should have plans to deliver learning 100% virtually. COVID cases continue to increase in areas where they attempt to reopen, so there needs to be a fallback plan if it's unsafe to bring students back for in-person instruction. The high school students wouldn't wear their badges. It's unlikely they'll wear masks and social distance to keep themselves and each other healthy. Jennifer Owens from Perkiomen Township writes, how will they determine who goes what days? Are parents allowed to give insight on who the kids need to go with on those days because of ride sharing? Meg Evans from Skippack Township writes, thanks for taking our questions into consideration. Would it be possible to offer both in-person and online schooling for the elementary schools? I know many parents will be working outside the home and will find it impossible to do virtual school. The parents who are concerned about sending their children can take advantage of the virtual option. Would it be possible for the teachers who are concerned about going back into the classroom to be virtual teachers? Hope the meeting goes smoothly. Nicole Moore of Skippack Township writes, we are enrolled to start kindergarten this fall at Skippack Elementary. I'm curious if the board has addressed young students and how any of these approaches will work for them, as they're in a much different environment than high school students. Particularly special needs children who will potentially have a difficult time wearing a mask and social distancing. What are their options when mixing with typical classrooms? How will the school handle children that show any signs of sickness through cold and flu season? How will you expect children to quarantine every time, or will you expect children to quarantine every time they have a symptom? The next comment's from Michelle Watcher Ward of Lower Frederick. I've been giving this a lot of thought with my son in mind. My child is very intelligent and had all A's and B's for the first 3 marking periods last year. The last marking period was a disaster. He did not feel the need to sign in daily and refused to go to the Zoom meetings. We had many arguments and had a lot of tension between us. I understand the importance of being back in school, but safety has to be a major consideration. What I think would work is to have the teachers actually hold class every day on a normal schedule. They could be at their home or in their classroom, it doesn't matter. They would be in front of their computer camera teaching just like in a normal class. All the students in that particular class would need to log into the session to watch. For those parents who can't work from home, there could be a buddy system. For example, if my neighbor had to go to work, but I'm working from home, I could have their children at my house for school. I'm sure each of us has someone that we could pair up with. Alternatively, there could be those kids in the school who absolutely had no one they could buddy with. The teacher would then have a few actual students in their classroom to teach to, with everyone else watching online. There would be less interaction than if the kids were all crowding the halls in school, which would help lessen the risk. As for the little ones, I don't know that there is an easy answer. Kindergartners need to have classroom exposure, but they are little germ factories in the beginning because most haven't been exposed to that many kids at one time. For the other elementary kids, the online teacher sessions could work. I know that without any accountability, my son, who is entering 10th grade, will not want to log in until it fits his time frame. Knowing that there is an actual teacher there to teach him something when he logs on will be a huge incentive to get online. I don't envy any of you. This has to be the most difficult thing you have ever done. You know you will get backlash no matter what the decision is. Good luck to you all. I'm ready to proceed with the school year. How do you decide? Thank you. Let's see, Tom Weiss from Collegeville Borough. What actions are being taken right now while the school is not in session by both administration and teachers to determine what equipment and skills teachers need to teach virtually so that we as a district are prepared for both the start of the school year, regardless of the method chosen, as well as the possibility of having school shut down again through the winter, should that be mandated? Many organized sports groups have been operating for months now without issue. Has anyone consulted with those groups to see what's working well and what their experience has been to better forecast our reopening? Are there any coordinated efforts with neighboring districts? Regardless of what method is chosen, it is fair to say we will expect the schools to be cleaned and sterilized more so than usual. Has the school given any thought to what cleaning products and methods will be used? Have the service providers been consulted to assess the air quality and possibilities for cleaning the air aside from just spraying down with chemicals? Have any alternatives been cleared for chemical-free green cleaners which meet the CDC's guidelines of acceptable cleaners? There are some. Okay. Excuse me. Shannon Vitelli from Lower Frederick Township writes, 3 thoughts that I wanted to share for consideration that do not necessarily need to be addressed, but would like considered. I understand that not all students will be able to wear a mask and that teachers will not be permitted to ask the students to put it on or ask for a reason why they are exempt. While students are protected by ADA, there are many parents that are proudly proclaiming that they will not allow their student to wear a mask and that no one can ask why. I would like to know that my children's right to a safe environment is also protected. Can you have classrooms that are designated for students who are not wearing masks so that they are not in contact with those who are wearing them, similar to allergy tables? Additionally, any staff that comes in contact with these students should have a higher level of PPE. How do you plan to guarantee that people who choose to travel to a state on the current list are quarantining after travel, particularly as school resumes? Lastly, we have already seen 2 sports teams attempt to resume practices in the past 2 weeks, and both have had to be suspended due to positive tests. This was after a few practices with precautions in place and small groups. It's hard to imagine any number of students and staff in one building without constant disruptions every time there's a positive test. Thank you for your time. Jason Fleischgood from Trapboro writes, hello, I would just like to request that you discuss a scaffolding reopening plan as well. This is where it would be up to each family to either attend 100% in person or 100% virtual, no in between. I believe this is the actual hybrid option that makes sense. Those with health conditions or who just prefer to be virtual can be 100% virtual for the year, and the others can be in person. This would drop the enrollment to a sufficient level to accommodate the need for smaller class sizes. It would also make room for teachers with underlying health conditions the ability to teach a 100% virtual classroom. This would also allow parents who will have to be working outside the home full-time as a realistic option. And we say we want to prevent the spread, but this hybrid 2 to 3 day week proposal will be no different than the above mentioned plan. In fact, it may be worse. When kids aren't in school, many of them will need to go to other care facilities that are generally already at capacities before COVID. Now these kids will be interacting with at least 2 sets of peers on a daily basis as opposed to just their classroom. I feel like far too many people are only considering what is best for their family as opposed to the entire district. My family is fortunate enough that we will be able to handle whatever route the board decides to go with. However, I cannot think of a way this hybrid schedule will work for a single parent who must work outside of the home during school hours. Someone please explain to me how that is at all possible if that parent cannot afford the level of daycare they would need in place of the school. Whichever option ends up being the final plan, we will continue to support our entire amazing PVSD community. April Panaka from Skippack Township writes, hello, I'm a parent of a child who goes to Perk Valley West. I had an idea. What if the kids stay in their homerooms for all classes except gym? They eat lunch in their main classroom, and the teachers are the ones who switch classes from period to period. This way, if someone does get sick or test positive in their class, then it would limit the chance of further spread through the school. Then just those kids in that class would need to be quarantined. I think it's kind of going back to basics, but would limit the kids moving through the building during the school year. Just a thought. Thank you. Okay. Courtney Carrer from Collegeville Borough writes, I came upon these questions today that someone posted on another school district's Facebook page and felt that they were important enough to bring to your attention. Many of these questions should be addressed before deciding how to proceed with the school year. Questions for school openings. If a teacher tests positive for COVID-19, are they required to quarantine for 2 to 3 weeks? Is their sick leave covered paid? If that teacher has 5 classes a day with 30 students each, do all 150 of those students need to then stay home and quarantine for 14 days? Do all 150 of those students now have to get tested? Who pays for those tests? Are they happening at school? How are the parents being notified? Does everyone in each of those kids' families need to get tested? Who pays for that? What if someone who lives in the same house as a teacher tests positive? Does that teacher now need to take 14 days off work to quarantine? Is that time off covered? Paid? Where is the district going to find a substitute teacher who will work in a classroom full of exposed, possibly infected students for substitute pay? Substitutes teach in multiple schools. What if they are diagnosed with COVID-19? Do all the kids in each school now have to quarantine and get tested? Who is going to pay for that? What if a student in your kid's class tests positive? What if your kid tests positive? Does every other student and teacher they have been around quarantine? Do we all get notified who is infected and when? Or because of HIPAA regulations, are parents and teachers just going to get mysterious, may have been in contact emails all year long? What is this stress going to do to our teachers? How does it affect their health and well-being? How does it affect their ability to teach? How does it affect the quality of education they are able to provide? What is it going to do to our kids? What are the long-term effects of consistently being stressed out? Thank you. Christine Hamilton from Skipback writes, I have one child in 4th grade and another in 7th. I tuned into the last meeting hoping for a miracle hybrid plan. I was disheartened to hear that it won't be possible for teachers to require students to wear a mask. I feel that if any in-person learning occurs, parents and students should sign consent to wear a mask when asked. If masks are basically optional, we will not even consider in-person learning at this time. I was also disheartened to hear teachers had not been surveyed about their level of comfortability and opinions on the feasibility of certain plans. I had not thought about substitute teachers, how many we might need, and how many would even be willing. And the idea that if elementary went hybrid, many working parents would need to enroll their children in daycare, which would cause much greater safety risks and exposure. Hybrid may also require teachers, our highest risk population in the equation, to still be in the school building every day, juggling both in-person and virtual learning. I can't begin to imagine the amount of planning and stress this would put on teachers. I imagine by the time flu season starts, we will inevitably be forced to go virtual at some point, regardless of our district's best efforts. Why not put the money and focus toward teacher training for a virtual classroom and a better virtual platform, while making sure every student has access to the resources they need for virtual learning? Obviously, there will be some parents who need to have their child at school for various reasons. Maybe an option could be offered where students can be monitored at school while on a Chromebook working virtually. Maybe another plan for much younger children. But the idea that we would put so many resources into trying to return to in-person with very little concrete information about risk to children and plenty of concrete information about high risk to teachers makes me think we should start with improving a virtual plan, wait for more information, and hopefully transition to in-person gradually. Meanwhile, I hope virtual would include more live streaming and structure that echoes at least half of a regular school day. I would also advocate for virtual small group discussion groups like clubs to keep kids socializing, collaborating, and discussing things. I think this could help their overall mental well-being. Thank you. Okay, Shannon Conrad from Collegeville Borough writes, please, please, please keep in mind some kids have family at home who, if God forbid, get COVID, they could die. You guys are doing a great job. Thank you. John Basidu from Skipback Township writes, 2 questions I would appreciate an answer to are, if the school goes to a mixed online actual attendance model or full-time attendance model in the fall, Is there a contingency plan if a COVID outbreak occurs, and what is that plan? In the case of online learning, can you give us an idea of what kind of learnings the district has gathered from this past spring semester that will improve the learning experience of the students in the fall? Thank you. Okay. Russell Talone from Skippack Township writes, over the course of the last 2 weeks, my wife and I have been devoting more of our time discussing the trade winds of sentiment around what school might look like for our 3 boys at Skippack Elementary, K, 2nd, and 4th. I'm sure it is consuming every weekend moment for you and many others, and we appreciate the work everyone involved is doing on our behalf. I know it is impossible to please everyone. In my opinion, the loudest and most vocal social media voices are usually not only the hardest to please, but often are counterproductive as a means to an end. Complex issues are rarely well communicated and thoughtfully considered in 140 character increments. The 3 options presented appear to well cover the available alternatives, and I appreciate the effort expended to get us to this present point in the discussion. The problem, of course, is that what works for one family might be the polar opposite of what works for another. What in some minds is best for students may create a conflict of interest for teachers. I would like to urge the committees tasked with designating the reopening plans and guidelines to consider offering all 3 options in parallel. Parents and teachers opt into the formats they prefer, and the physical buildings are divided and designated accordingly. I'm certain I'm overlooking the myriad challenges such a 3-pronged approach would entail, so excuse my naivete. Is such an approach possible? I know from personal discussions that there are teachers anxious to get back into the classroom full time. My understanding is the survey suggests there are a solid block of parents anxious to get their kids back into option 1 normal circumstances as well. Could we group all of these folks at, say, Schwenksville Elementary, regardless of where they live? I'm only considering the elementary schools for argument's sake, but I assume this might be viable for middle schools as well, with there being multiple buildings. For those who prefer option 2 hybrid, they could go to Skippack Elementary, again, regardless of location. And for those who are particularly fearful or susceptible in their family and home dynamics and want to elect virtual only, staff virtual only with the equally health conscious or susceptible teachers, and or offer a sabbatical year. If there is a dearth of existing teachers open to in-person options, perhaps recent grads or subs in the lower risk categories would be open to filling the gaps on a temporary basis. Transportation appears to be a hurdle already. From a personal standpoint, as a parent, I would drive my kids wherever I need to if it means they might have option 1. It seems like a reasonable sacrifice in these trying times. As an employer, I would certainly allow and even expect in this environment accommodations for employee parents to do the same. Okay, I'm going to truncate that comment due to time. And then the last one is from April Gilman from Perkiomen Township. Please consider a hybrid model that involves 2-week blocks where students and teachers are in the school for a 2-week time period, and then the other half of students are home doing virtual days. If anyone is affected by the virus, it would show up in the 2 weeks. In elementary, it could be 3 grades each 2 weeks. In middle school, it could be 1 team each grade. I'm not familiar with the high school to have a specific plan for how to divide teachers and students, but could be 2 grades for students. The level of deep cleaning would be decreased between sets of people as well. Okay, and that concludes the public comments that were received prior to the meeting. Okay, let's see. And I have 1 attendee raising their hand. And actually, Mr. Ganesh, if I can ask you, I'm not seeing an option to allow them to speak. I'm seeing a chat option. Do they simply chat?
I can enable them.
Okay, would you please? Okay, and I'm seeing a couple more hands raised. So I see 3 hands up. Kate Sapala, Diana I'm sorry, I'm not saying this person's name correctly, but Magin and Sherry Doobie. So let's have the comments from those three individuals, and then we'll move on into the next section of the meeting.
Okay, Kate can talk now.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. On behalf of PVEA, I would like to complete reading Bill's comment earlier. It goes on to say, also, our recent PVEA survey found that about 25% of our staff would be seeking some sort of leave or retirement if we follow through with the proposed model of face-to-face instruction. This means the district could be looking for a little over 100 substitutes. Under normal circumstances, PV has difficulty finding enough substitutes. Filling that many vacancies during COVID-19 crisis would be a monumental task. Being able to maintain a proper cleaning schedule during the day while the buildings are occupied will be a daunting task. The board will need to hire an army of custodial staff to do the cleaning and sanitizing during the day. One study I read recommends wiping down student areas 6 to 8 times a day. The PV teachers hereby request the school board approve a plan for the reopening of school for the 2021 school year that involves all students participating in a 100% remote learning environment until an effective vaccine for COVID-19 is developed and available. This is the safest for staff, students, and the community. We also request that we utilize the remaining time during the summer to develop a more robust remote learning environment for the students. The remote learning we did during the spring was done so in an emergency setting, and the PV teachers did an amazing job under the circumstances. We have the opportunity to make remote learning for the coming school year more meaningful. Let's not waste the remaining time planning for students to be back in buildings, because we know that a plan will need to change several times due to new information that becomes available regarding the virus. Instead, let's collaborate and make remote learning more robust, meaningful for our students. The most important aspect of why we're asking for remote learning is that teachers do not feel safe returning to the physical building, and we do not have the confidence that the safety of our students and our safety can be assured 100% of the time. Respectfully, William McGill, third grade teacher, Perkioven Township resident, PVEA president.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ganesh, can you unmute the next commenter, please?
Yes, Diana can speak now.
Hello, I'm an evergreen parent. I have an incoming first grader and an incoming fourth grader. I'm also a certified teacher, and I have taught both brick and mortar schools for many years, as well as cyber school. I'm actually curious, and as you can imagine, given my background, the spring situation, I watched fellow teachers do the very best they could in an emergency circumstance. Obviously, we were going in with our eyes open this time. And I know successful cyber education. I actually taught low incidence populations. So my question basically is, my opinion from my own family is that they will not be attending school in person in the fall. I'm just trying to figure out if PV, under their virtual option, is going to allow us to have access to their teachers and the curriculum virtually through direct instruction. Obviously, the spring was not conducive to that. Teachers were thrown into something they had to learn. But for the fall, that my question, is basically, will that be offered direct instruction virtually? And I understand that the IU offers different options, including what is dubbed the PV Virtual Academy, which essentially is an education vendor, not with our teachers. So I just want to basically advocate for the parents who I think aren't very clear on the different virtual options, and also, just ask that the board please give some clarification on that and make sure that the board themselves knows those options. That's my only thought.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Ganesh, I believe we still have one commenter left.
There are no more raised hands, Mrs. Lofton.
Oh, okay. I guess somebody took their hand down. Okay, great. Well, let's now move on to section 2 on reports, and we'll start with section 2.01, which is our students liaisons report, and I'll turn it over to Ms. McGovern and Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Pretty much the same as last week. Students just really want to know what's going to happen, but are trying to enjoy their summer, I think, as much as possible with the restrictions. So pretty much the same here.
Hi, everyone. I elected to use my time this week just to preface and share my own personal opinions along with fellow students that I talked to over the last few days. And I would like to start by just talking about the current idea of schedules for the upcoming 2021 school year with regarding the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Wednesday flex day. I know personally, I really hope that we can be back in the physical building regarding if that's on a full-time schedule or if that's on a hybrid schedule. I really would like to discuss about how trying to make that hybrid schedule a very strong possibility instead of giving that as a virtual option. I believe virtual should be an option. We saw it in the results in the surveys that had over 4,000 responses that I think a lot of people really want to get back in the building. If that means that we have to be very, very strict on guidelines, which I think a lot of students are really wanting to do. I think that goes for even athletic events. I think that's really important to the mental aspect of a student along with being in the physical school. I also believe regarding masks and what the school can possibly do as a school district as a whole, along with the high school especially, because I have a individual experience there over the last 2 years, which has been fabulous. But if that's what it has to come to, I think it unfortunately has to be, we really want to make strides to make it as safe as possible. And if you can attend, I really think students should attend. I think we see people who are very, very scared and wanting to push towards virtual, but I think it's very important to get back in the classroom as an individual and as a whole as the school. So I found it very important that I wanted to share my opinions and also students' opinions that I spoke to over the last few days. And I'd like to thank you for my time.
Okay, thank you both very much. We very much appreciate your input. Moving on to section 2.02 is the president's report, and I do have an update to just a couple slides to share in addition to what I had last week. Dr. Russell, are you able to share my slides? Or should I share my screen? Dr. Russell, I think you're on.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Lofton, I was muted. I'll do it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So last week during my president's report, I really highlighted some of the information that had been released by the American Academy of Pediatrics. They had released a statement regarding school reopening. If you could go to the next slide. And within 2 weeks of releasing that statement, they issued another statement, essentially walking back support for in-person school. And can you so the website for the article is at the bottom there if anybody wants to pull this up. And their new statement that comes out says that we recognize children learn best when physically in the classroom. I'm not going to read the entire statement, I'm just going to read a segment of it. We recognize that children learn best when physically present in the classroom, but children get much more than academics at school. They also learn social and emotional skills at school, get healthy meals and exercise, mental health support, and other services that cannot be easily replicated online. Schools also play a critical role in addressing racial and social inequity. Our nation's response to COVID-19 has laid bare inequities and consequences for children that must be answered. This pandemic is especially hard on families who rely on school lunches, have children with disabilities, or lack access to internet or healthcare. Returning to school is important for the healthy development and well-being of children, but we must pursue reopening in a way that is safe for all students, teachers, and staff. Science should drive decision-making on safely reopening schools. Public health agencies must make recommendations based on evidence, not politics. We should leave it to health experts to tell us when the time is best to open up school buildings, and listen to educators and administrators to shape how we do it. Local school leaders, public health experts, educators, and parents must be at the center of decisions about how and when to reopen schools, taking into account the spread of COVID-19 in their communities and the capacities of school districts to adapt safety protocols to make in-person learning safe and feasible. So I'm not going to read the entire statement, but the website for it is listed at the bottom of the slides. And I do think that it's really important that we take a data-driven approach and look at the evidence around COVID when making our decisions. So I know we had some questions last week about where to find data. Dr. Russell, if you could go to the next slide. I put on here, this is the site that I've been looking at. It's updated almost every single day. It includes data regarding the number of new cases within the county. You can go into they have detailed maps where you can look by municipality to see how many cases there are in each municipality, how many deaths there are in each municipality, the age of the people who died. There's just, it's an amazing trove of data that you can look at to see what is happening with COVID cases in the county. And it also breaks it down as to whether the cases are occurring in long-term care facilities, whether they are in correctional institutions, or whether they are happening in the community. So you can just really look at and take a deep dive into the data in a region at the site. And the next slide, Dr. Russell, is a website of the cases by in the state. And you can look at just, again, this allows you to cut and look at data in a variety of different ways to look at what the current trends are. And then lastly, the last slide just shows the website from the CDC where you can track cases on a national level. So I know there's a lot of different sources out there. There's also the National Center for Health Statistics, has a lot of very useful data. The CDC releases the morbidity and mortality weekly report, and almost every week they've got an article in there that talks about new evidence emerging around COVID. And the Johns Hopkins University also has a very informative COVID data information hub. So those are some of the sources that I've been looking at that I think are reputable sources of data for anyone who's looking to take a dive into the data themselves. So that's really all I had to share for my report. And so you can close out of that, Dr. Russell, and then I'll turn it over to you for the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mrs. Lofton. And I would like to follow up this evening to last week's meeting. So I'm calling this Superintendent's Report Part 2. And 2 points of interest in the conversations this evening. I want to go back to that phased school reopening health and safety plan that we talked a little bit about last week. And I want to clarify some of the purpose of that plan and some of the content, and then introduce you to some FAQs about that phased school reopening health and safety plan. So I mentioned last week that all school districts in Pennsylvania and the Commonwealth are required to have this phased school reopening health and safety plan approved by their board of school directors, posted so that it's publicly accessible by the community, and then sent to PDE, the Pennsylvania Department of Ed, for approval. And the plan looks like this. This is the cover sheet for the plan. And I called out already the requirements around some of what goes into the plan. The plan really focuses upon if we were to bring students back into our buildings and we are in either the yellow or the green phase, how would we uphold a safe and healthy school environment with students in the buildings? That's really the purpose of the plan. So I know that when I mention the word plan, lots of us are hoping for, well, how are we going to instruct our students? How are we going to deliver the educational services in the fall? This plan doesn't cover that. It really focuses on the health and safety that must first be in place before we bring students back into our school settings. So there are 4 major sections in this plan, and the first one is entitled Cleaning, Sanitizing, Disinfecting, and Ventilation. And the district is prompted with some of these key questions to consider each of those areas. If we have students back in the schools, how will we clean and sanitize and disinfect? So there's a table that the district must fill in. So under the yellow phase, this is how we would address that, those aspects of the operations of our schools. Under the green phase, this is how we would address that. So sometimes there are some differences there, and other times there are not differences between how we might support or operate under yellow or green. And then the individuals that are in charge and the materials and resources we need, and whether or not there's professional development required of our staff. So each of the 4 sections in this health and safety plan focuses on these 4 different areas. The second one is about social distancing and other safety protocols. So how will we maintain social distance among our students in school? And this was considered both at the elementary level, separate from what was reported or proposed for the secondary level. And again, we're looking at what happens in classroom learning spaces. We have to maintain 6 feet of social distance. If students aren't wearing masks, that's the minimum distance that's being expected of us out of the county health department. How would we arrange desks and how would we accommodate the students? In the green phase, it looks a little bit different. In both phases, we would expect our students to wear masks. A third section is monitoring student and staff health. So we really look at how do we maintain and monitor the health of our students and staff all in our school community and be attentive to the high-risk students. So again, we answer a series of these questions. And then lastly, what other considerations for students and staff do we need to make if we bring students back as part of this health and safety plan? So it's those 4 major sections. So really doesn't go into the details of how we deliver service. However, those conversations are happening, and you've heard bits and pieces of those, and tomorrow night in the community message, I plan to go into more detail. And some of the questions that have been posed to the board have been very helpful in me shaping that conversation tomorrow night so that I cover and address the questions you have about some of those different modes of delivering instruction that we've talked about. I did want to call out to you that we have developed a symptom monitoring questionnaire for all that would come into our school buildings. This is proposed to be completed by any individual, students through their parents, in some cases very young students. Older students would be responsible for monitoring their health and moving through this questionnaire daily before reporting to school. Staff would as well. And the idea here is that we self-check for any of these symptoms that we know are connected to COVID-19. And then, and then there's an algorithm that helps us to know how we as a school district will respond when there are positive symptoms, or a positive test with symptoms, a positive test without symptoms, exposure to a positive person, and then exposure to a positive person with symptoms. So the algorithm takes you through those steps, if this, then that. And this monitoring student and staff health section of this plan that needs to be board approved and go to PDE has been developed by our lead nurse in the school district. She's our department chair, Meg Lewis, in collaboration with the other nurses in our school district and county and state health officials. So there's been a lot of medical expertise that's gone into the development of this self-monitoring questionnaire. And this may look familiar to you if you think back to the athletic plan last week, and we've been talking about a lot of different plans these past weeks. However, this is the same symptom monitoring questionnaire that we are asking our student athletes who come onto campus for voluntary practices to take. They need to move through this symptom monitoring questionnaire before reporting to any of those voluntary practices that are led by some of our fall coaches. So the other thing I wanted to call out once again, as part of what we are proposing in our health and safety plan, is the expectation that students and staff will wear masks. And this is some of the language that comes from the order that was handed down by Governor Wolf back on July 1st. And students and staff can both bring their own face coverings, cloth materials. We've seen lots of creative masks out and about. We will also have some more generic medical type masks on hand in the event individuals need them. We also have face shields on hand in the event teachers and or students need those. So lots of protection to be afforded. When our students are eating or drinking, they are expected to be at least 6 feet apart because they won't be wearing a mask under those conditions. And if they're seated at desks and doing any kind of assigned work, again, we're encouraged to separate them 6 feet. Makes it very difficult, as I mentioned last week, to get a full class of students in the ways that we typically organize them into a room. So that 6 feet of social distancing is something that Montgomery County health officials are emphasizing, and we're planning to uphold in the event we bring our students back into our buildings. Something else I wanted to mention, again, I introduced this last week. I want to add to it. There were 4 more states added to the states list of other states in the United States. After a visit, individuals are expected to quarantine for 14 days due to the number of cases of COVID-19. So you can see that these 4 states were added. They're in red font, and they've been added since last week. So I wanted to also mention that one of the leading questions really is around how we plan to reopen schools. And again, while this plan doesn't go into the details of the instruction around a total reopen or a scaffolded reopening or a blended reopening or a total remote, that virtual that some of us have been talking about through our comments, this plan doesn't go into that. We will talk about that tomorrow night as part of our community message. And we've been discussing some of the ins and outs of how we would logistically offer choice to our families. So I appreciate that some of the comments reference that. Can we have a choice? And we're really working diligently to try and afford our families choice, at least at some level. And so I have checked that initially there were some cases of where we were thinking about a total reopen and others where it would be blended, where we would have students on site some days and virtual others. And I do want to share that I'm sort of taking a couple of steps back too, as I think about long-term planning and the health and safety of not only our students and staff, but our community. I am questioning at this point a straightforward traditional opening for all students at this point, based upon the data as it's been developing over the past week in particular. And we'll talk more about that tomorrow night as well. Mrs. Lofton referenced some of that too. So I wanted to just share with you that we also did post in our public section where this item appears later in the agenda, the request for our board to approve the plan. There are FAQs that helps to articulate and expand upon some of what I'm discussing with you this evening, and hopefully bring some clarity to the purpose of this plan and the content within the plan. So it won't include the details of how we instruct. And there's no real due date according to PDE as to when they want this plan. We learned that last week. However, we would like all of our planning to be finalized by the end of this month as a courtesy really to our families, so that then they can in turn plan for the fall, whatever that might mean for their families. So the how of instruction, really that decision around how we will instruct our students, whether it's traditional, hybrid, or virtual. You've heard us mention these different terms. I'll go into some details about those tomorrow night. And again, the questions you've posed, whether they were presented tonight as part of the comments last week or in emails to me, I'm very appreciative of those. They're very helpful in shaping the discussion. Here's a little bit of detail. This presentation will be posted. It'll give you a flavor of what we're thinking right now, and may prompt some additional questions from you. Most importantly, and I want to call this out, we want to be sure that whatever mode or how of engaging our students in learning we do this fall, whatever we put into place, we want to look at it through an equity lens and make sure all of our students in the school community have access. That's critical. So I've called that out on this slide. Lastly, I'll mention that we're talking about some different ways of learning. They're non-traditional. So when we talk about a hybrid approach and students being on site in the building some days, working virtually other days, that's a really different way to do school, if you will, to operate our schools. And under traditional circumstances, when students report to their buildings every day and move through classrooms, we have to record 180 days of school, or 900 hours at the elementary level, 990 hours at the secondary level. And we're obligated to submit this information to PDE at the end of each year. There is now an exception to how we can meet these time requirements, when in the past, that rarely was considered. So our board is being presented with a resolution tonight that declares an emergency situation and provides us a temporary provision allowing for flexibility in attaining those 180 days of school for our students and those 900 or 990 hours. So some of it can be seat time via that traditional approach, or it can be virtual, or it can be all virtual. So lots of flexibility that's being provided right now through this section 520.1 of the school code. And that ends my report this evening. Thank you, Mrs. Lofton.
Yay. Thank you very much, Dr. Russell. That brings us on to the solicitor's report, and I will turn it over to Mr. Supers.
I have no further report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Supers. So board and district committee reports. I just do want to mention that we had finance committee as well as policy committee last week, and the minutes from those meetings are attached in the, I'll give the computer a minute to catch it. There we go. So if you scroll to the bottom of this agenda item, you can see all the minutes coming from meetings over the past month are attached here. Does anyone have anything to add or anything that they want to call out related to any of these items? That would be great. Okay, I'm not hearing anything. So we'll move on to section 3, comments on the consent agenda. Comments from the audience are accepted on any agenda items. Okay, I don't see any raised hands. So we will move on to section 3.02, approval of the consent agenda. Items that represent standard routine business of the board. I'm going to put this on the screen here. Okay. Items that represent standard routine business of the board are included in the consent agenda. Is there any item a board member would like to have removed from the consent agenda developed on July 8th, 2020 and placed back into the regular agenda for questions or discussion? The consent items include 5.04, 5.05, 5.06, 5.07, 5.08, 5.09, 5.10, 5.11, 5.15, 5.16, 5.18, 5. Dr. Russell, isn't 5.19 the one that was removed from the agenda?
Yes, it is, Mrs. Lofton.
Okay, so we'll
Make
need to
that
take,
correction.
yeah, we'll need to take 5.19 off this list.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Russell. 5.23, 7.02, 7.03, 7.04, 7.05, 7.06, 8.02, 8.03, and 9.03. So can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda with the removal of 5.19?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The consent agenda is approved. And that brings us on to the education section. Now, I know Dr. Kohler was running late to the meeting. Dr. Kohler, are you with us yet this evening? Okay. So would someone else like to read the education section?
I can do that.
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Evans-Brockett. That would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Item 4.01, comments on education. I don't see any hands raised in the participants. So item 4.02 was addressed last week. 4.03, the recommended action is to purchase Reading Wonders 2014 edition at a cost of $47,332 as presented, and I so move.
Second, Matthew Dorr.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries.
Item 4.04, the recommended action is to approve the proposed allocations for Division of Federal Funding, Title 1, 2, 3, and 4 as listed, and I so move.
Second, Gene.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Actually, I'm sorry. I'm looking at this again. It says Title 3 TBD. Is it okay that we have it, Mr. Supers? Is it okay that it says TBD, or does that need to be filled in?
I think that just means we don't know the amount we're getting yet.
Okay.
That's
So
correct.
that's okay that we have it like that. Okay, my apologies. All right, so we had ayes. Were there any nays? Okay, hearing none, motion carries.
Item 4.05, the recommended action is to approve the proposed allocations for the 2020-2021 Ready to Learn grant, and I so move.
Second, Wade.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Item 4.06, the recommended action is to approve the 2020-2021 Parent-Student Handbooks for elementary, middle, and high schools, and I so move.
Second,
Second,
Gene.
Wade.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
4.07 is the projected enrollment report for next year. Is there anything of note that Mrs. Smith or Dr. Russell would like to comment on this?
No, it's reflective of last week's education updates, unless you have something to add, Dr. Russell.
No, I was going to say the same thing. I mean, we're still monitoring our kindergarten numbers, but yeah, it's aligned to last week's numbers, data. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I have a quick question with regard to the enrollment report. I think I did mention it last week as well. I'm curious as to when we would potentially be able to see numbers reflected based on decisions presented. I mean, I realize one thing follows the other with regard to what options families might choose to take for their children, and you know, how soon you think we're anticipating being able to gather the feedback from them.
Ms. White, I think after tomorrow evening's community message, Mrs. Lester, Mrs. Smith, Dr. Boyd, and I have a parent survey prepared that we would like to send out soon after. And get a more targeted sense or intentional sense from our parents, what they're thinking about for each of their children, their child or each of their children. So we're designing the survey so that it goes to parents and is connected to a student. So the demographics are very clear for us. So I'd like to outline the details of the possibilities tomorrow night and then survey our parents, hoping that they can then make a more informed decision as time has gone on and we've sort of continued to evolve the conversations and some of the details. So we should have that data, sometime next week, so that by the end of the month would be my goal, that we can propose a final, this is how we'd like to deliver instruction in the fall.
Okay, I appreciate you clarifying that publicly. And then just as the other side of the coin to that, what you've said makes perfect sense in terms of timing. I want to make sure that the same information with regards to who intends to come back to school and who would really prefer to work in a virtual model is sent to the staff and to the teachers as well. Because I know I reiterated this last week, one number has no meaning without the other number, because we can't even appropriate resources for whatever students do prefer to come back to brick and mortar without teachers to serve them, obviously. And I do know that it's really more rhetorical for the public, but I would like to know that we are going to see the data from the teachers' preference and feedback from them.
Will do. And there's been and we've had some conversations with our PVEA leadership around that, and we'll continue to discuss that with them and take some of those data in summary format to share with you and give you a sense of what it is our teachers are thinking. And you're hearing a little bit of that through the comments tonight. We'll drill down and attempt to get some more details. So that is an effort we want to make. There was a meeting with staff today, a state of the district meeting that really was an effort to offer them some additional detail and bring them into the fold of the many conversations that have been happening and help them to know where we are in our thinking and the why of some of that thinking at this point in time. So we'll certainly continue to look at both sets of data and keep our board informed of what we learn from these two stakeholder groups.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And to that end, Mr. McGill's comment, understanding the limit of a 3-minute public comment. I was a little bit disappointed that email that he sent on behalf of the union was presented during public comments. I sort of was hoping that it was going to be presented in a separate area where it could be read in full, or that perhaps he could even address the board and the public. I just feel as though in allowing folks to have their voice, as they should, publicly, that it has not been necessarily very supportive of the demands that are being placed on teachers and staff, including administration. And, it's very focused on individual concerns and individual family circumstances. And what is being kind of lost in the sauce, so to speak, is the concerns that of all, rather than just one, which is of course our mission statement. So, I appreciate all of the thought that has been going in, but, I think a lot of times when things are not reiterated in public, the message gets muddled. So I appreciate you reiterating all of those things.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. White.
And I'm not sure if this is the correct time to ask this, but you brought up the survey. So just in terms of surveying parents about which option they would choose, will it state in there knowing that, would they choose to send their child back knowing that we can't enforce masks? And also, will we be asking who plans to take a medical exemption for masks? So we kind of have that number too, because I know that's a big concern in the community and could affect the numbers of students that come back.
Yeah, I appreciate you making the point. So I'm gathering that out of comments, and I have also received some emails from different families expressing or raising questions about wearing masks and expressing concern. So we'll attempt to make that clear in the survey. Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, and so that brings us on to 4.08, which is a new item. And it looks like it's more of a discussion item.
The intention here is, yes, I see there's no motion. Thank you, Mrs. Evans Brockett. There's sort of a motion in terms there's listed, but there's no motion. So I recognize that there may be some questions. The idea was for you to approve this if you as a board are comfortable with the health and safety guidelines we've outlined in the plan. And if not, as I mentioned earlier, we learned from Mr. Subers, there's no real due date. It's not due by the end of the month, if you will, which is the timeline I am trying to stick to really be informative to our community about all things returning to school in 2021. So we could, I guess I would defer to Mr. Subers whether or not we need to actually make a motion from the floor because it's not on here.
Well, before we do that, I'm wondering if we're actually ready to vote on this, if we need to gather some of that additional data from the surveys that you mentioned, as well as watch the trends in the county over the next couple weeks. I mean, I know everybody wants an answer. I know everybody wants to know what they're doing in the fall, but
I move to table this.
yeah, I feel like we need to get a little bit more feedback and input from our community, and also really keep a really close eye on some of the trends. I know what I've been reading in the news over the past week has been pretty alarming. I'm not sure that I'm 100% ready to move forward with the plan as we currently have it listed. Even though it's a little bit open-ended.
I would tend to agree. I don't know that we've had a lot of time to look at the plan as it's presented here. And I'd like some time to really, take a deep dive into it. My question is, though, I think you mentioned earlier in the evening, Dr. Russell, that, the approval of the plan is kind of the first step. And then once the plan is approved, then we move on to actually planning for how to implement, how to do the hybrid instruction or the blended instruction or the virtual instruction. Do you need this plan approved tonight, or do we have some time to talk about this and investigate it a little bit more deeply?
I think as a board, you have some time to talk about it and digest it. And actually, I was thinking of requesting of Mrs. Lofton that maybe in executive session this evening, we talk about some of the safety aspects that go into bringing our students back to school based upon some of the questions that have been posed and the conversation started at the board level. So yes, Dr. Weston, you can certainly have some more time to digest it. And then again, as things come together by the end of the month, maybe there will be another board meeting, or maybe you will look at it on August 3rd, but it would be nice to be able to have a final decision for our families by around the end of the month. So it's okay to hold on to this a little bit.
And right now, there is no motion on the floor, so there's no need to table anything.
Okay, so if no one's making a motion, which I agree with, that ends section 4 on education.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Evans-Brockett. I will turn it over to Mr. Dorr for section 5.
Thank you, Mrs. Lofton. I do not see any hands up, so section 5.01 comments is moot. Move on to section 5.02. Was an update on July 8th. 5.03, there's no report for grants and donations. 5.04, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 are all on consent. 5.12, the action was taken last week, as well as 5.13 and 5.14. 5.15 is on consent. 16 is on consent. So a new item, 5.17, motion to approve the proposed allocations for the ESSER, Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Funds. And I so move.
Second, Gene.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
5.18.9 are on consent. 5.20 is a new item. Motion to approve turf facility rental agreements with the proving.
Mr. Dorr, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I think, Mrs. Lofton, did you say 5.19 earlier we were taking off consent?
Yes, you're correct. That's still on there. My apology.
Oh, yeah, I thought that's, Dr. Russell, this is one that we did not actually have the agreement in place for 519. Oh, we'll give Dr. Russell a moment here.
I'm sorry. I'm going to refresh because my understanding is the numbers have changed. So let me go down.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
It was
5.21 that was removed. 5.21 was removed from the agenda.
I
5.1,
thought it was the school physician that we had to remove.
it was the football doctor.
Oh, well then that's my bad. Okay. So then we should have left 5.19 on the consent agenda. So Mr. Moore, Mr. Dorr, my apologies. Could you actually make a motion to do 5.19 since we did take that one off?
Sure. I'd like to make the motion to leave 5.19 on consent. And I so move.
Second, Gene.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay. 5.20, motion to approve turf facility rental agreements with the proving grounds for the PVHS field hockey team from August 17th to the 28th, 2020 at a cost not to exceed $5,203 pending solicitor approval of all documentation. And I so move.
Second, Wade.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Beth.
I have, the proving grounds, and this may be cause for discussion later, but it's my understanding that the proving grounds is where they had a COVID outbreak about a week ago. Has that been looked into, and have their mitigation plan? Have we approved their mitigation plan as far as making sure that our hockey players are safe to play at the proving grounds?
Dr. Russell, is Mr. Glancy on to be able to answer that?
let me check. That's a really good question. Let's see.
I just promoted him to panelist, Dr. Russell.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Ganesh. Thank you.
And just as a tail of that, are we really in a different place than we were last week with the notion of paying out this money for that's non-refundable for something that may indeed not be teed up to happen?
That was addressed. That is addressed in the new agreement.
Ms. Roberts' concern is somewhat addressed because the provision that was added allows us to cancel for COVID-19 reasons. And if we were to cancel for those reasons, we would be entitled to either a credit or a cash refund at our request.
Thank you, Mr. Subers. Have we presented them with our expectations as far as safety precautions, as far as their facility is concerned, or are we just at liberty to cancel the agreement at any point due to COVID?
We're entitled to cancel the agreement at any time prior to its commencement, prior to actually using the facility, if it's for COVID reasons. And if you look at section 16, it says tenant must interpret and comply with COVID-19 guidelines and orders as they see fit. For cancellations due to COVID, rental fees may be refunded in the form of credit towards future rental or cash refund if requested. So I think as we get closer to the actual usage of the field, we can determine what the situation is vis-a-vis their COVID guidelines and as well as ours, and make the determination as to whether it would be safe for our players to use that facility at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Subers.
So do we feel comfortable voting on this evening?
I think Mr. Glansky was anticipating it, particularly in light of that additional language.
Okay. I so move.
Second, Wade.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, 5.21 was removed from the agenda. 5.22 is a new item. Motion to approve MJ Earl Inc. to install compressor and evaporator replacements at the administrative building, Evergreen Elementary and Skipback Elementary at a total cost of $42,757.25. And I so move.
Second, Gene.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
I apologize, I was on mute. 5.23 is on consent. 5.24 is a new item. It's a request to approve a settlement agreement and release number 259509.
Sorry about that.
All
Sorry.
right, I'm going to restart this. Motion to approve settlement agreement and release 259509 in lieu of fate as recommended by the solicitor. And I so move.
Second, Wade.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And that ends my section.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Dorr. We'll move on to section 6 on payment of bills, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Weston.
Thank you, Mrs. Lofton. Item 6.01, comment on payment of bills. I don't see any hands raised, so we'll move on to the next item, item 6.02, ratification of bills and payroll and authorization of payments. The recommended action is a motion to ratify the payment of bills and payroll as per the list submitted for the period ending June 30th, 2020, and to authorize the payment of bills on the check and voucher registers submitted for July, and I so move.
Second, Gene.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, item 6.03, approval of the treasurer's report and financial statements. The recommended action is a motion to approve the treasurer's report and financial statements, including summary of cash and investment accounts, as prepared by the administration for the period ending June 30th, 2020, and I so move.
Second, Matt Dorr.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And that concludes section 6. Thank you.
Okay,
Sorry about that.
oh, that's all right. Okay, so moving on to section 7 on professional personnel, and I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Evans Brockett.
Thank you, Mrs. Lofton. 701, comments on professional personnel.
Oh, I see a hand up. Do you see that, Mrs. Evans Brockett?
Now it disappeared.
It did disappear. Did someone have a comment? Please raise your hand again. Okay, I'm not seeing. Oh, there. All right, I see a hand up. Mr. Ganesh, can you please unmute the
Yes,
our
sorry, done.
community? Thank you.
All right, Tracy, you can make your comment. Tracy, it looks like you're on mute. If you wanted to make a comment, you can, well, no. I think we'll come back to Tracy if she has a comment. There's a section later that she can speak then, but we'll move on for now. So 702, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all on consent. 707, the recommended action is to approve the employment of the following administrative personnel pending fulfillment of all statutory requirements, and I so move.
Second, Wade.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those, are there any questions? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
708 and 709, action was taken last week. 710 is a new item. The recommended action is to ratify the administrative salary as listed for the 2020-2021 school year effective July 1, 2020, and I so move.
Second, Matt Dorr.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And I do want to, I'll interrupt you for just a moment, Mrs. Evans-Brockett. I believe Dr. Rena Kohler has now been able to join the meeting. Excuse me. So welcome, Dr. Kohler.
Thank you. I'm here.
Great. I actually have a motion I'd like to make from the floor to approve the position transfer agreement as presented, and I so move.
Second, Wade.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And that concludes section 7.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Evans-Brockett. That brings us on to section 8 on support personnel, and I'll turn it over to Mrs. Roberts.
Thank you, Mrs. Lofton. I'm not able to see if there are any comments on support personnel. Can you see if anybody has their hands up?
I do not see any hands up.
Thank you very much. Okay. 8.02 is on consent. 8.03 is on consent. 8.04 is a new item, and it is the approval of community education appointments. And the recommended action is to approve the provisional appointment of the community education personnel as listed pending fulfillment of all statutory requirements. And I so move.
Second, Gene.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And that concludes section 8. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Roberts. Dr. Hallis, section 9.
Sure. Comments on governance, and I do see a hand up. Mr. Leggett has his hand up. Karthik, are you able to admit him, please?
Yeah, he is. He can talk, speak now.
Go ahead, Mr. Leggett, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hallis. Firstly, I'd like to say that I fully support the resolution that is proposed here to declare the ongoing COVID emergency for the next school year. It's a necessary step for this board to take to preserve all the options that we need in order to open the schools or to move to a hybrid situation. So I do fully endorse that. Secondly, I'm grateful that the community has finally embraced board meetings as a forum here. But in the discussions about the board meetings and where they are to meet, I believe that the board should set an example and live by what they're proposing for the students. So I would suggest that perhaps a hybrid may be the way to move forward on further meetings. This will help protect the board members that are susceptible to illness like Dr. Hallis and others who don't want to expose themselves, but it also helped bring some of the public comment sections of the board meeting back closer to normal, where pre-submitted comments were entered into the record. And if you wanted to speak, either at the beginning of the meeting or during the meeting in a particular place during the agenda, you would be able to do so. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Leggett. I do not see any other hands up. Item 9.02 is a first reading on policies. The following policies are presented for a first reading. 103, non-discrimination, discriminatory harassment, school and classroom practices. 146.1, trauma-informed approach, which is a new policy. And 832, educational equity, which is a new policy. And I open the floor for comments from board members. Okay, seeing none. Item 9.03 was on consent. Item 9.04 was a discussion last week of board meetings on site versus virtual. And item 9.05 is a new item. It is a motion to approve a resolution declaring an emergency pursuant to section 520.1 of the Pennsylvania School Code as presented, and I so move.
Second,
If I may, I think it would be appropriate to defer this and approve it in conjunction with your health and safety plan, because it incorporates the health and safety plan by reference. So until we have that approved, this would be premature, and I apologize. I wanted to catch you before you made your motion.
So should I make a motion to table?
Yeah, a motion to table would be appropriate.
Okay, then I make a motion to table item 9.05, the approval of the COVID-19 emergency resolution.
And second, Matt Dorr.
Okay, we have a motion to table on the floor. All those, or are there any questions about tabling? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. The item is tabled. Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Hallis. That brings us to section 10, closing items. Section 10.01, comments from the audience. Comments from the audience are accepted on any topic. I do not see any hands up. Give it just a moment. Okay, seeing no comments from the audience, move on to section 10.02, comments from board members.
I have something. I just want to say that I have been going around and around and around and around about the reopening plans in my head since actually the pandemic started, because I knew that we would be facing a decision like this come the fall. And I would just like to say, Mr. Smith, I appreciate the voices of the students in this discussion. And I'm awfully glad that we have you as a liaison to speak to other students and people your age in order to get input on this particular subject. However, I think that it's important, once again, to remember that the success or failure of any plan that we offer, other than completely virtual learning, is going to be 100% reliant on 100% participation, 100% perfectly, 100% of the time. And that means that everybody is going to have to do their part. That being the case, I would urge students who may be listening in or who may be speaking to Mr. Smith at a later point to understand that the success or failure of any plan that we decide for any of you is going to be entirely in your hands. This is maybe the first and only time you will ever have that kind of responsibility in your life. So it's important to know that we are not able to mandate mask wearing. We are not able to mandate social distancing. We are not able to mandate hygiene, nor are we able to mandate your honesty in expressing whether or not you come to school sick. So I would encourage anyone listening to understand that this may be charged to the board to make these kinds of decisions and to think about these kinds of things. And it is a great deal of pressure because I never signed up to be saving lives and saving health. But that's what we're charged with at this point. But it's important for everyone listening to understand that this has entirely to do with personal responsibility, the responsibility of the students, the responsibility of the parents, and the responsibility of the staff to do what they need to do in order to make sure that this is successful. Because if we don't make sure it's successful, we're going to be shut down again in 2 weeks anyway. So really, it's so important, and I can't reiterate enough. I mean, people are putting themselves on the line. Our staff is putting their lives and their health on the line to come in and teach students. And so we need to be respectful of them, and we need to be respectful of one another. And that's all I have to say.
I had a few things I would like to say as well. Mrs. Lofton, did you want to respond to that, or?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to, first of all, I want to say I agree with Mrs. Roberts very much. I mean, the success of any plan to come back to in-person school attendance is going to be dependent on everybody making the full effort and doing their part to minimize the risk of transmitting this infection. That said, in order to transmit the infection, you actually have to have the infection. And this is where I get frustrated with the kind of, the guidance or the lack of guidance that we get from public health officials in managing this situation. A couple of weeks ago, we had the statement from the AAP saying how important it was for students to get back in school. And I fully agree that it's important for kids to get back to in-person instruction. That statement was unfortunately, I think, heavily politicized, which led to them coming out with their further statement that you read, that you called to our attention earlier in the evening. And the statement that really sticks with me is, we need to, that they say, leave it to the health experts to tell us when it's safe to go back to school, and leave it to the educators and administrators to figure out, how to make that happen. And what I don't think we're getting is that input from the health experts, from the public health experts, as to what we're looking for in order to be able to go back to school safely. My thought on what that is may not be the best way. I'm not a public health expert. I do have a science background. I'm a scientist, but I am not necessarily an expert in public health. So I really am frustrated by the lack of guidance that we're having on what we should be looking for in order to achieve a safe reopening. When this pandemic first came into the state, I think the state managed it very well. They set criteria for moving from different phases, from red phase to yellow phase to green phase. There were criteria around all of that, and those were pretty closely followed. And they gave us, they let us know what to expect and when to expect it. We don't have that in this situation here. We're very much lacking for that. If you look at the dashboard for the state, looking at COVID cases, Montgomery County, as far as I can tell, has been looking reasonably good for the last month or so. The number of cases per day that are being reported is fairly flat. Is that good enough to get kids back in school? Is that what we need? I don't know what the burden of disease is or the burden of infection is right now in the Perkiomen Valley School District sending area. That's something I would really very much like to know, and it's something, and we don't know. As far as saying we can't come back to school until there's a vaccine, that I'm saying is with my background, I have a background in vaccine development, and I'll go out on a limb and I'll say a vaccine approved by the FDA is at least a year away, if not more. So if that's going to be our standard, then we're looking at virtual instruction for a long time to come. We need to think about what really is a feasible goal for coming back into school. And for that, I think we really need some help from the state and from the local public health authorities. And I guess I'm expressing my hope that someday we get it.
So
Thank you,
I'd like
Dr.
to-
Weston. I thought that was a very helpful way of framing how to think about this as we continue to move on this back to school journey. I apologize. I should have commented during governance, but I didn't. I would like to just state that I do think I agree with you, Dr. Weston. I think it is very important as a school board that depending where we land and what we're asking our school teachers and students to do, that we need to mirror that and do the same. So understanding that if we do meet in public physically, which I think that we would be able to do, and social distance and be safe, making exceptions for those board members or administrators who have health issues, and that they, of course, would not need to be there. But I would like to see us as a board start to take steps moving towards that, especially since we are currently in the green phase and people are going to work and starting to hopefully safely do what they need to do in the community.
I'd like to comment too, kind of piggyback on what Dr. Weston said, and thank you for those comments, Dr. Weston. Many of them were on my own mind. The only thing I would add, I think, is as I look at comments from everybody coming in, is I know it's hard. I know it's frustrating. Many of the board members I've talked to are frustrated as well because we're not getting clear guidance from the state. In my own work life, I work for a nonprofit educational foundation, and we bring students in from all over the country, and I'd tear my hair out if I had some. I really empathize with the concerns of parents and faculty. I guess the only thing I'd add is, sometimes some of the comments come in and there appears to be an assumption that we've reached a conclusion. And anything but. We as the board, I think, are really struggling ourselves to try and understand the situation. So what I'd say, I guess, is, please just bear with us, because we really are trying to figure out what is the best option for everybody involved. And that answer is not terribly clear right now. And we keep trying to work towards some clarity, but it is a challenge. So thank you.
So just to all of those points, the only thing that I would really like to add is just to reiterate the fact that all of this does truly come down to personal responsibility. And to that end, I feel in a lot of ways that there are some, and the PVEA is probably, statement from tonight was probably the closest to responsibility acceptance as anything I've seen to date, in the fact that they have definitively said what their stance is and what their recommendation is. And, we do a lot of talking in a lot of different meetings about all different subjects, and we always talk about stakeholders. And aside from the kids that we are responsible for, not only educating, but also protecting, making decisions about their education and their protection as a school board, we are also beholden to all of our staff, each and every one of them. And that stakeholder group, that voice, needs to be the driving factor in all of the decisions that we make. Yes, community voice is important. Yes, community involvement and the right to speak on behalf of their individual circumstance is important. Yes, we need all voices, but at the end of the day, none of us on this panel are going to be in the rooms with those stakeholders. And that's something that is unavoidable. And so to that end, and to, you know, a little bit to touch on a little bit on Mrs. Mayer's comment about in-person meetings, I absolutely agree that whatever is mandated is what we should also have to abide by. No one should be asked to do something that another is not willing to do. I 100% agree with that. That being said, in the green phase in Montgomery County, most businesses, most professional businesses, in-person work is only if able. So, you know, most of the folks that I know that are luckily able to work remotely are still doing so. People are going into their offices only as needed, with the exception, of course, essential workers. And of course, teachers are essential workers. But it's our responsibility to look out for our own as a district and as a community. And I don't have a level of confidence that everybody is on board in the community to the same extent that we are. You know, I would be willing to do whatever it took in order to abide by any guidelines that were put in place. But when I see chatter from large sections or appearingly large sections of the community that are not in agreement to abide by the protocol and health and safety restrictions that we put in place, that gives me pause. And it makes me feel that not only are we putting our stakeholder staff and teachers in jeopardy, we're putting our own children, the ones that are abiding by the health and safety restrictions put in place, in jeopardy as well. And as a parent of a child in the district, I don't feel comfortable, regardless of whatever hybrid solution or in-person solution we would put in place, sending my daughter into a school among children who come from families that don't respect the others around them. And so for that reason, I fully support the union's statement with regards to 100% virtual. I know we will have more conversations about it. I know that we will continue to have changing guidelines from our state and local officials about it. But I just feel at some point, because time is bleeding away from us, we need to draw a line in the sand, make a decision about what's happening so we can make a rock solid plan for these kids to go back in the fall. And that's really all I have to say. But I've become increasingly frustrated by the dissent of those in our community that will seemingly go out of their way to quote unquote buck the system for one reason or the other. And, you know, to Dr. Weston's point, because it was made political, or however you want to tee it up, regardless, it's inappropriate to only consider your own personal needs in a school setting. That's all I've got.
I absolutely agree with Ms. White. Public health relies on public trust. And to be honest with you, even though I'm trying to keep an open mind, I simply do not trust the ability or even the desire to comply with the guidelines for everybody who is involved. I am not, being a vulnerable person myself, I'm not particularly interested in sending somebody into a situation who may be in the same situation I'm in. I'm not comfortable sending our teachers back if they are afraid to go back to school. So we have to be able to trust each other. And right now, I really don't. It's become very contentious. It's become very political. And I really don't have the trust that I would need to have in order to fully get behind even a hybrid opening.
I just had two things I wanted to bring to attention also. For one, this is more of an address to like the community and everyone listening, but there's been a lot of talk about how COVID-19 isn't really prevalent among the youth. And while that is true, I think we all noticed that this past like month or so, that's the numbers have risen for a younger group, and that to bring to the attention that it really only takes one person at school to cause an outbreak. So even, and it happens, like it happens in Montgomery County with young people. Young people of my age who are in high school have gotten and get COVID-19. So although it's not as prevalent as it might be in adults or the elderly, I think it's still something the community and the board need to consider when planning that. And I know you all have, and that brings me to my second point, which is just a thank you. You guys have worked really hard, and as a student, you know, I appreciate you caring for my safety, and as a person, I appreciate you putting so much time and dedication into where this goes. So thank you.
So I really appreciate everything that everyone has said. I will say, as a working parent, I would love for my kids to go back to school. However, watching the data, watching stories of the outbreaks, looking at how we are seeing outbreaks spread through our community, it's very concerning to me. And I keep thinking back to some of the data that was shared both in my president's report last week, as well as what Dr. Rushel shared in her superintendent's report. And there was some data that had been generated by Mathematica looking at the contributions of schools to the spread of COVID in the community, as well as how quickly we would have to close school based on what model that we looked at. And so there was some data that was shared that looked at the assumption that if we had 5 cases, we would need to close the school. And it looked as though, unless we went, 1 day a week, the chances are that we're going to have to close school within a couple weeks of opening. If we go by that threshold, which was what was being recommended. And I think a couple things. I think it's not just the health and well-being and safety of the children and the health and well-being and safety of all of our staff. It's also the health and safety and well-being of every community member. It's the grandparent who is taking care of the child after school. It's the teacher who lives with their parents or goes to visit their parents or has a family member who's going through chemotherapy or is on some sort of a medication. I know there was a survey that I saw in the yearbook of the high school students that said that 1/3 of the people in the high school live with a family member who is immunosuppressed. So I think when we start thinking about the risks, it's so much bigger than just the risks posed to our children. It's the risks posed to our entire community that we need to be thinking about. And given that, I think there's an incredibly high likelihood that if we do open schools, we're going to wind up needing to have large sections of our community quarantining, and along with the associated increased risks that we would be causing, I think we should look at considering what it looks like to go full virtual when we go back to school. And I think that we have 6 weeks till school starts. And a large part of the challenge was the abruptness of shifting to virtual in the spring. I'd like to see energy and time and resources devoted to making our virtual experience as good as it can possibly be. And there may be instances in which some in-person instruction is needed. I don't know if there's opportunities for staff who are willing to serve in a role to provide some sort of on-site supervision to students who are receiving virtual instruction as a strategy to support working families who would benefit from that type of an arrangement. I think the hybrid approach really does create a lot of challenges with the mixing of different child care populations. So for working families or parents who rely on the schools as part of their child care arrangements, I think that we should be looking creatively to see what we can do to support those families in a way that will make it feasible so that they're feeling that their child is in a safe and supportive and nurturing environment while they're still able to do their jobs. But I think we should be focusing on making the best possible virtual environment that we have. And I think it'll be a lot easier if cases keep going down, if we're not seeing spikes in our area. I think it'll be a lot easier to weave back in a hybrid on-site model than it will be to try to start with a hybrid model and then have to abruptly go back to being full virtual after exposing people to serious health risks. So that's all I have to say on that.
And I agree with what you just said, Mrs. Lofton, and I really think we need to start, whether we start out completely virtual, we're going to end up virtual at some point, whether that's because we have a spike in cases or because people have to quarantine, there's going to be virtual. So I think that that's the model that we really need to prepare for. And then what we need to be looking at is, what do we do for those kids where mental health is a concern? What do we do for those kids where working parents is a concern? Those are the problems that we need to be focused on and be able to figure out the answers rather than this hybrid, traditional, whatever. Virtual is, I agree, is the way we need to be looking, and we need to be looking at these other problems and how to solve them.
I'm not real. I have a lot that I want to say, but I guess I'm going to just say that we also really need to look at the, and Dr. Russell stated this, the special education population. So we still have, I think, a decently large chunk of students that are more at risk for really suffering more than maybe the typical student in the school. And we need to really take that seriously and really just be driven by science and looking at the other countries and just seeing how we can best move forward.
Mrs. Mears, I didn't catch that last part there. Thank you.
I just said, I think all I said was just see how we can best move forward. Is that I was just talking about looking at the other countries, looking at the science, and really being driven that way. Because the reality is, if we have a vaccine in a year, we don't know if it's a virus, and it's and I'm not a scientist, but if it's a virus and it mutates, what are we going to do? I mean, we have to at some point as a society figure out how we're going to keep living our lives with and respecting the virus and all the issues that people have, the health issues and all of that going along with it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to everyone for all their very thoughtful comments about this. It's just a very challenging situation. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and all the hard work that everyone's been putting in on this. Dr. Russell, you mentioned you did want to have an executive session after the meeting for the purposes of discussing safety.
Yeah, safety and labor negotiations. We
Okay.
have labor situation as well.
Okay. Great. So we will have an executive session after the meeting for safety and labor negotiations. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic evening.
Thank you.